The impact of his Irish nationality on Stephen Dedalus. In the novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Stephen's own words, "This race and this country and this life produced me. I shall express myself as I am," echo an assertion of the fact that nationality and religion are among the strongest influences of the Irish life that has formed him. It is an ultimate statement that elicits Joyce's indisputable commitment to his past, to what produced him, to the influence of what went into the creation of the consciousness, or to be more general, the mind that inhabits the portrait of a certain artist. The portrait of a human being, an artistic consciousness or not, is but a vain emptiness without those social, political, and emotional dimensions of the environment that brewed him. In response to Davin's words, Stephen says, "When the soul of a man is born in this country, there are nets flung at it to hold it back from flight. You talk to me of nationality, language, religion. I shall try to fly by those nets." So, the study of a slow and dark birth of a soul and that of a human child's evolution into an artist is a simultaneous insight into the historical and psychological environment that caused him. How the complex elements of a life, not only in isolation but also in conglomeration, interacted with the child's consciousness and impacted upon it to create him into what he eventually chooses to be, forms the enthralling account of Stephen's early life in the novel. To understand this, the first element we need to reflect upon is the unique, thought-provoking name James Joyce has chosen for the protagonist of his novel. The name conjoins two significant characters from the history of human civilization. The name Stephen invokes the first Christian martyr, Saint Stephen, who was stoned to death outside Jerusalem in 34 AD. And Dedalus is a name inspired by the mythic personality of Dedalus, which in Greek means the cunning artificer. It will not be irrelevant here to dwell a little on the exploits of this great mythic character of Dedalus in an attempt to extricate a better understanding of the significance of this sort of nomenclature. Dedalus, master craftsman and artist of supreme stature, created a labyrinth for housing Minotaur, a monster half-man, half-bull creature. Later, he was imprisoned in a tower in Crete with his son Icarus. For an escape into freedom, he invented 2 pairs of wings by using feathers and gluing them together with wax. During the flight, Icarus disobeys his father's warning and flies too high and too close to the sun, eventually causing the wax to melt and to disintegrate the wings. Icarus loses his wings and unfortunately dies by drowning in the sea underneath. But Dedalus safely lands in the island of Sicily only to be greeted and accepted by its king. But Dedalus safely lands in the island of Sicily only to be greeted and accepted by its king. These themes of escape, freedom, and artifice emerge as dominant impulses in Stephen's life as he grows up in stifling Dublin drabness. The Irish Act of Union in 1800 made Ireland a part of the United Kingdom following centuries of English colonization and exploitation. Dissolving the 500-year-old Irish Parliament, when a direct rule from London ensued, it thrust the Irish identity into a space torn between the conflicting tides of the time. The Ireland Stephen was born into was seeking ways to deal with the ineffable blow. Stephen Dedalus, the artist in quest of mapping his soul, can be located in the dynamics of this blow. The lines of the texts Joyce authored invoke the eloquence of his contemporary socio-political situation and its disappointment. It is this disappointment that got transmuted into a melancholy, almost a romantic melancholy, that signifies choice and a distance of a stranger who is but steeped into the life of each and every moment of his time. The Irish Act of Union was unequivocally supported by the Catholic Church because it nurtured promises of various financial supports and gains. It can be noticed that the Christian Brothers opened their first school for mass education in 1802. The middle of the 19th century saw the Catholic Church increasingly operating hand in hand with the British government in order to be regarded favorably by the government, which in turn permitted further establishment of schools and colleges. Successive governments conferred various grants to Catholic institutions in Ireland, leading to the ideological infusion into the academic construct in the mind of the nation. Stephen Dedalus's own college in the novel, Clongowes Wood College, was founded in 1814 by the Jesuits. His second school, Belvedere College, as well as the University College of Dublin, were founded by the Jesuits in 1841 and 1853 respectively. Born and educated a Catholic, like James Joyce himself, Stephen too was trained by Jesuits at the university, which Cardinal Newman helped to found. Joyce admired Newman and was influenced by his writings, which revealed, beneath its lucid prose, a man who had arrived at his conviction through spiritual agonies. Stephen's journey is that of shedding the convictions Newman arrived at, but like Newman, he was to go through spiritual agony himself. The Catholic Church officially denounced revolutionary acts with a strict regularity and saw the way to progress lay through parliamentary means, and the Catholic Relief Act of 1829 sought to encourage this by granting middle and upper class Catholics the right to vote and take seats in the parliament. The Protestant population, however, opposed the act greatly as it took away power from their hands. Michael Davitt, 1846 to 1906, a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood and the Fenians, advocated violent rebellion and took part in a disastrous uprising of the 1867. His policy of land nationalization attracted mass support. There was in 19th century Irish politics a growing emphasis on the need for home rule. In this context, the name of Parnell makes its grand entry in the Irish history. Charles Stewart Parnell, 1846 to 1891, Stephen Dedalus's hero in the novel, was an Anglo-Irish Protestant landlord who had inherited his family's estate at the age of 13. He had become a member of the parliament at the age of 29. Parnell was a charismatic orator and a brilliant tactician, and he won the hearts of his Irish followers, Catholic and Protestant alike, by providing them an orientation, a dignity, and a truly Irish identity. He was despised and feared by British politicians. Together with Davitt, Parnell's Land League promoted an aggressive policy of civil disobedience, chiefly through peasant farmers holding their rents, with the ultimate aim of redistributing land to tenants, but at the same time compensating their former landowners. At the height of Parnell's popularity, when success was near at hand, Ireland was thwarted of all its historical expectations, to the utter dismay of his fellow countrymen when Parnell's tragic downfall occurred. The realistic prospect of Irish Home Rule was in sight. What the Times scandal could not achieve was achieved by a divorce case sensation. An affair between Parnell and Catherine O'Shea, wife of Parnell's fellow MP, had begun in 1880, apparently with the full knowledge of her husband. When O'Shea sued for divorce, Parnell was disgraced as an adulterer. The supporters both in his party and the sympathizing parties were offended and withdrew their support on moral grounds. In succeeding elections, Parnell failed to regain political support. In June 1891, Parnell married O'Shea and retired to Brighton, where 4 months later he died. He was brought home to Ireland to be buried in a spectacular funeral, an event that supplies material for little Stephen's dream about the return of the dead hero's body in the first chapter of the novel. Ireland and her long struggle to attain nationhood suffered a profound political defeat with the fall of Parnell. The Christmas dinner episode in the first chapter in the novel unveils, with all its intricacy, how the tragic impact indelibly wrote itself in the psyche of Ireland and its individuals, illustrating a fundamental contradiction in the Irish sense of national identity. The setting was a Christmas dinner, one of Stephen's key childhood memories, a heated argument involving Stephen's father and his friend Mr. Casey, both of whom disagree with another guest, Tante Riordan. Stephen's father appears consistently humane and compassionate towards the betrayed leader. Mr. Dedalus and John Casey continue to consider Parnell as the only hope for a free Ireland. As against that, Dante Riordan, proud of the church and disdainful of Parnell, fiercely attacks and criticizes the immoral, adulterous leader, reflecting the stance of the church itself, using the absolute terms of a religious fundamentalist when she says, God and morality and religion comes first, God and religion before everything. The unpleasant memory of the terrible conflict further enabled to deeply impress in Stephen's consciousness the image of a lonely leader betrayed by his own people, and the persistent spirit of Parnell casts its shadow on Stephen's destiny. Not only at home, but also in the life encountered outside his home, Stephen comes across friends who are such polarized characters in both their temperaments and politics, standing on the opposing sides of the question. The Christmas dinner was the first occasion in the child's life when he was first allowed to sit at the dinner table with the elders. The mercilessly distressing experience gathered at this Christmas dinner hardly provided any relief from the tribulations of his school life and acquainted him instead with a dimension of the reality he inhabits that goes on to have a formative influence in his mental makeup. It surges back up in chapter 5 of the novel when Stephen ridicules Irish politics for its predisposition to betrayal and treachery. When asked by other university students to join an Irish nationalist group, Stephen refuses, as he does not want to sacrifice his life for a nation that deserted the man whom he has been brought up to consider a heroic leader, someone more worthy than the people he wanted to lead. Parnell's story allows Stephen to justify his own cynicism and the self-sufficient individualistic stance which he adopts when he tells his friend, "My ancestors threw off their language and took another. They allowed a handful of foreigners to subject them. No honorable and sincere man has given up to you his life and his youth and his affections from the days of Tone to those of Parnell, but you sold him to the enemy or failed him in need or reviled him and left him for another. And you invite me to be one of you? I would see you damned first." Stephen, extraordinary progeny of a declassed family, naturally has reason to identify himself with the courageous souls who strove and were martyred in the cause of Ireland. Feeling that they have been let down by their own followers, by those whom they were trying to free. Stephen's reaction is not a singular one for the Ireland of his time. Stephen holds the Irish people responsible for Ireland's defeats and refuses to show his solidarity with an uncritical patriotism, a communal movement demanding conformity. Eventually, Stephen grows up to reject feeling of loyalty to either religion or politics, regarding them as paralyzing, constantly threatening to compromise his intellect and freedom. Parnell's downfall becomes a crucial family event in portrait, a personally traumatic experience, and finally, a model of what Stephen will not become. Albeit having been named after the first Christian martyr, Stephen will not be recruited into the ranks of Irish martyrdom. The third chapter of the novel highlights Stephen's negotiation with a religious identity, a negotiation that leads to a final and ultimate negation of the same. The adolescent Stephen, with his twilight hankerings for sexual fulfillment, finds peace in the arms of a Dublin prostitute. Shortly thereafter, he is gripped by remorse and fear on listening to the impressive rhetoric and the vivid infernal images in Father Arnold's 3 sermons, an ultimate compunctious surrender of Stephen's youthful spirit into the framework of morality, into the idea of a Roman Catholic obsession with an avenging God and his absolute authority follows in Stephen's life. He makes a confession of his sin and leads a life of purity and strict rigor. His remarkable religiousness brings him an offer to join the Jesuit order, the possibility of attaining priesthood, which he right away rejects. Not only the church, he also gradually alienates himself from his father and his patriotic nostalgia, as Mr. Dedalus himself is busy arranging for a place for Stephen in the university. Stephen also turns his back to the Irish cultural milieu of the time. The post-Parnell period was a time of groping for new orientation for Irish nationalism, which politically led to Sinn Féin and culturally to the so-called Irish literary renaissance, the Gaelic language movement, and the Gaelic sports movement. Adding to the disastrous famines of 1840s, the mass exodus from Ireland to the USA, a dramatic decline in the use of Irish language owing to this exodus, as well as an official policy to replace Irish with English as the first language, did enough to contribute to the damage of the self-esteem of an Irish individual. As a result, Ireland remained a backward country, suffering from continuous economic crisis during the 19th century. With famine, immigration, defeat plaguing the lot of this nation, Irish culture remained meager and was further debauched by the counterfeit elements like the literature of the stage Irishman. The liberating influence of the Great French Revolution found its eclectic expression in the works of patriots like Thomas Davis and Mangan, as well as in the novelist Carleton. The romantic sadness in Mangan's Dark Rosaleen somehow evokes the tinge of sadness that Ireland's experiences rendered to this thin culture of hers. The first stage of Irish literary renaissance, often marked as an anglicized culture, contains this note of certain alienness, as it failed to give an utterance to Ireland's need of his time. In this complex situation, where things Irish were associated with backward peasant life, and English was the language for social elevation, to locate the Irish identity was a difficult task, the burden of which fell on the cultural laborers like Yeats, Synge, Lady Gregory, who began to study the neglected language and folklore of peasant life, chiefly in the west and south of Ireland, where the Irish language had survived British attempts at its eradication. Neither Yeats nor Synge wrote in Irish, but they made use of the idioms as well as the rhythms of the language and made effective employment of the mythology and the settings of the ancient and peasant ways. It found thematic material in the legends of Ireland's free and pre-Saxonized past. A fresh and poetic language was sought in the speech of the poorest, the most backward section of the Irish peasantry. James Clarence Mangan made modern translations of old Irish texts. Standish O'Grady, frequently referred to as the father of this movement, attempted to re-establish the old legends on a Homeric level. Images of great figures of their past were held forth in these works as if in an imaginary compensation, though perhaps not consciously, for their lack of leaders in the present. The pride hurt with Parnell's calamitous end, the Irish could still derive some cultural subsistence and a sense of pride and inspiration from the images of Fergus and the other heroes of the legends. All this contributed to the creation of an idea of Ireland's own culture as her individualistic expression of her nationhood as she was led down on the historical plane. It was Ireland's unique way of resisting in the face of assimilation, an answer to England. Evidently, what Joyce turned his back to was not a decadent cultural life, but an energetic and popular one. The emphasis of this stage of the movement was significantly on the past. Joyce could not fit into it. At one point, defending himself after he has rejected all that produced him, he says, "I am not responsible for the past." In an entry in Stephen's diary, this fascination with the past is linked to Yeats and the Irish revival. Not this, not at all. I desire to press in my arms the loveliness which has not yet come into the world. Stephen does not want to embrace a long-faded loveliness proposed by Yeats's Robertus. Stephen's gradual progression into life of an artist is eventuated by his epiphanic revelation at the vision of a woman wading through the waves and through a gradual formulation of an aesthetic theory posited in the understanding of the reading of Aquinas. Stephen's gradual progression into the life of an artist is eventuated by his epiphanic revelation at the vision of a woman wading through the waves, and through a gradual formulation of an aesthetic theory posited in his understanding of the reading of Aquinas. Stephen admits, "I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it call himself my home, my fatherland, or my church. I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning." As his vision and his goal as an artist evolves, it has to undergo the process of decolonizing himself from the history by which the Irish have been made. Ireland has always been at the mercy of other nations, he realizes, and until and unless he breaks with all that he himself represents, he has no future himself. As the art he wishes to pursue is new and free, as it assists an awakening from the nightmare of history. As he prepares to embrace the new promise of a life in art, Stephen says, "Welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscience of my race." In Stephen's flight for freedom lies the prospect of Ireland's uncreated conscience. With that, our lecture on the impact of his Irish nationality on Stephen Dedalus comes to an end. The works consulted in the preparation of this lecture are here. Here are some materials for further reference. Here are a few links for further reading. In addition, we have a set of model questions helping us to further our thinking on this topic. Briefly delineate the impact of his Irish identity in the growth of the artistic consciousness of Stephen Dedalus as portrayed in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I am not responsible for the past. How does Stephen negotiate with his nationalistic identity in his pursuit for aesthetic freedom? Describe with references to the novel. Discuss how Stephen Dedalus's individualism is influenced by Irish nationalism. Here is a small quiz that has been prepared for your understanding of this topic. What is the religious identity of Dante Riordan? A. Catholic, B. Methodist, C. Protestant, D. Adventist. Quiz 2. Which organization did Stephen become the administrative leader of? A. Irish National League, B. Sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary, C. Red Cross, D. The Fenians. Quiz 3. Who does the expression Lord Lightrim's coachman stand for? A. A staunch and devout Catholic, B. A deceptive individual, C. A loyal Irish gentleman, D. A person subservient to England having no patriotism for Ireland. Quiz 4. Which romantic novel does Stephen reenact with his friend Aubrey Mills? A. Three Musketeers, B. Great Expectations, C. The Count of Monte Cristo, D. Lampedusa. Quiz 5. Which image inspires Stephen's epiphanic revelation that ushers in his new life as a young artist? A. The vivid image of hell in Father's sermon, B. A girl wading in the sea, C. Aileen Vance's beautiful hands, D. Cranley's fuming speech on nationalism. Now the answers. Quiz 1. A. Catholic. Quiz 2. B. Sodality of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Quiz 3. D. A person subservient to England having no patriotism for Ireland. Quiz 4. C. The Count of Monte Cristo. Quiz 5. B. A girl wading in the sea. With that, our session comes to an end. Thank you for your patient audience.